2014 has been the best reading year of my adult life. It's the year that I finished university, so was able to read what I wanted when I wanted. It's also the year that I discovered the booktube community and got a job in a bookshop. So at its close, I would like to share with you 10 books that renewed my love of all things literature. So here we have my top 10 novels of 2014. The first one is The Luminaries, which I actually started in 2013 but finished this year. This was a fantastic read. I just wish that I'd had a bit more time to sit down and read the whole thing at once. This book is so cleverly structured. It has that kind of tone of a Victorian novel. It's set in Hokitika on the west coast of New Zealand, which is not too far from where I was born, and it really evokes that time and that place. It's part mystery, part Victorian novel. It's beautifully written, and I would definitely recommend that you pick this one up. I know that I go on about it, but there's a reason for that. My love of it has also extended to 3 copies of it. You can see 2 of them here. The second book is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. This was the first Donna Tartt book that I read and absolutely adored it. I raced through this, read it on holiday, and it's one of those books that combines art and literature, beautiful prose, and it's just so good. It's sort of centred around this main character and the painting, The Goldfinch, which is there and also features on the front. Some people have said that they found the middle bit of this in particular really slow. I really enjoyed the middle section and found it very interesting because it's to do with this relationship with this boy who is a bad influence, to say the least, but I found the dynamic between those 2 characters very interesting. It's a fabulous book, and as with all of the books on this list, it's one that I would like to reread. Next up, I have a book by Haruki Murakami, and this is Kafka on the Shore. Now, this book I read as an audiobook and also on my phone, so I don't have a copy of it. Will hopefully show up here. This is a stand-in for all of the Haruki Murakami books that I've read this year. I read Kafka on the Shore first and absolutely loved it, and I've since read The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, Norwegian Wood, The Strange Library, and Colourless Tozukuro Tozaki and His Years of Pilgrimage, and I have 3 of those here. What I really loved about Kafka on the Shore were the different stories going on, the sort of subplots, and also the magical realism, which was so strange and unusual, and I've since seen that Haruki Murakami's works are very much like that. Of course, these 2 are not magical realism, but I really enjoyed these as well. What I most enjoy about Murakami's work is the conversations that the protagonist has with other people, and they're often very philosophical and deep conversations. Most of the time in Murakami it seems to just be the main character plus another character in a scene, which I really like. This is particularly true of Kafka on the Shore, so that's that. Then there was Ruth Ozeki's A Tale for the Time Being, another one I listened to as an audiobook. This was narrated by Ruth Ozeki, and that made it particularly special. This is another multi-layered narrative. You've got the diary of Naoko, which gets found by Ruth. It's Ruth's reading of it and our reading of Ruth reading it. And within Naoko's diary there are also stories of other characters in her life and the stories of people they knew as well. So you get this almost stacked narrative in there. But the fantastic thing about this book is how those all link together. There's this bit of magical realism in there as well, particularly towards the end, and I just found it to be really compelling, especially as an audiobook. This next book is along similar lines actually. It's The Incarnations by Susan Barker. I made a full review of this one, so I won't talk too much, but it's another one with multiple layers of narrative. You've got this present day story, and then you've also got these letters and stories that are being written to the main character in the present day. We have this theme of incarnation and history repeating itself. The only reservation I have about this is that if you're sensitive to particularly violent scenes, and there is sexual violence in here, then I'd give this a miss. but otherwise I would highly, highly recommend that you read this because I found it to be very thought-provoking. I learned quite a lot about Chinese history and particularly some of the darker moments of Chinese history. I know I always talk about this cover, but it's lovely. I don't have my copy of this with me because my mother has it and she has gone on a trip down the west coast of the South Island. Ali Smith's How to Be Both. This is another story about art. It's another one with multiple narratives that link together. In this case it's two narratives, two main narratives. Depending on which copy you pick up, they are different ways around and that will affect your reading of it. I'm still waiting for a friend to read the other edition of it so that we can exchange notes about that and to see how our readings were different depending on which half of it we read first. One story is set in the present day and the other one is in the 1400s and follows an artist. It is in this stream of consciousness style, which might take a bit of getting used to if it's not something you usually read. It took me a few pages to get into it, but once I did, it was well worth it. You just have to go with the flow. And it's another one of those books where I wanted to savour every word, as with Eleanor, Catton and Donna Tartt. Now, this is the last magical realism book, I promise. The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. I've done a review of this book as well. Needless to say, I loved it. It follows this single character called Holly Sykes throughout her life from her teenage years up into old age. So it goes from the 1980s up until about 2040, so it's into our future. So there's a bit of a dystopian thing going on in it as well. It's set in the same world as Cloud Atlas, so we get to see how the world gets to the point that we see in the middle section of Cloud Atlas. So if you're a David Mitchell fan, if you read and liked Cloud Atlas, then read this, but I also think that this would be a really good place to start with David Mitchell. I'm still trying to decide if I liked this one or Cloud Atlas better, but it's a close call. I wasn't sure whether or not to include this next book, but I think I will because I just found it so hard-hitting. This is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This is the first and only James Baldwin that I've read, but I am very keen to read more of his works. This book broke my heart, and so that is why I'm including it, really. I think of this book as a psychological portrait. It's a portrait of love and longing, and it's also a portrait of internalized homophobia. I'd heard quite a lot about this novel before I read it, so I didn't expect to be particularly surprised by it. But I was. There's a plot point that you get told about really early on that I hadn't heard about, and it surprised me because of how it impacted me. I didn't expect to be moved so much by a novel, and especially by a novel that is so short. James Baldwin, hats off to you, because not many authors could manage that level of emotional impact in such a short space. Another book that is actually quite similar to Giovanni's Room that I read very recently is Maurice by E.M. Forster. I actually listened to this as an audiobook, but I saw this copy in a secondhand bookshop a couple of days ago and I had to pick it up because it's one that I will definitely reread. This is another novel where the protagonist is struggling with his sexuality and ends up in a homosexual relationship. There's a lot of internalized homophobia in this one as well. I found the psychological elements of this really interesting and hard-hitting in the same way that I did with Giovanni's Room. Also, I can't resist books that are set at universities. I just love them, so there's no surprise that I really enjoyed the first part of this that is set at Cambridge. As with all British novels, there is a lot to do with class in this. I've read a couple of Forster's other works and this was definitely my favourite. So that brings us to the 10th and final book of my top 10 books of 2014. I read this shortly after finishing The Goldfinch and enjoyed it more than The Goldfinch. This book gave me the biggest book hangover that I have ever had, and that's including Harry Potter. I was as enthralled by it as I was with Harry Potter as a child. And it is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is another one set in a university, so that ticked one major box. It's about a bunch of classics students, and in the first few pages we learn that they have killed one of their classmates and friends, and the rest of the book is really a whodunit. It explains how they got to this point of needing to dispose of their friend, and it also explores the consequences and the aftermath of that murder. Now, you would think that a book that starts with the murder and tells us exactly who did it and when couldn't possibly be suspenseful or interesting. But this was the most heart-pounding book. There are lots of twists and turns in this plot that I just wasn't expecting. As with the Goldfinch, Donna Tartt's writing is exquisite. I wanted to savour every word, but I also wanted to read it really fast to find out what was going to happen. But I didn't want it to end either. This is definitely one that I will reread and reread. None of the characters in this are particularly likeable, but by the end of the novel, I felt like I knew all of them intimately, and the atmosphere of this novel is very evocative as well. Again, it's that level of detail that Tartt puts into her writing. There are problematic elements to this book, namely the female character and the way she's depicted, and also the level of privilege that these characters enjoy. So it's worth being aware of those if you do read it, but it's so good. So good. I might just go away and reread it now. So there we have it, my top 10 novels of 2014. I hope you enjoyed this and have been encouraged to pick some of these up if you haven't already. If you want to leave a comment, please let me know what your favourite books of this year were. Thank you very much for watching. Have a lovely and safe holiday break, and I will hopefully see you in the new year. Bye.